Introduction to color. The first thing I did when I came in today was make a few improvements to the value painting from yesterday. This guy, that was way too big compared to this in front. It needed to be the opposite. The one in the front, perspectively, has to be larger. And I changed the angle on this. So you gotta just step back and learn to be your own critic on these things. There's a few other spacing differences that I made, but I also want to be mindful that I want this to be darker than this. And the darker, softer seems to fade away a little bit more, which will help with the perspective. When you set up your palette, okay, so cad yellow, cad red, alizarin, and ultramarine blue. Then I took...
I'm sorry, I want to clarify, because you have
three yellows. Well, this is really the same. It's just two different... There. That's cad light, cad yellow light, medium.
Okay.
This is an orange made from the cad light and the cad red light. Alizarin. The green is from the cad yellow light and the ultramarine blue. And then I made actually a lot of purple because the paper is purple. I'm going to need it. And I mixed it only with the alizarin because alizarin is a blue-red. And when I mix that with blue, it gets purpley. If I mix the ultramarine with the cad red light, it's got some yellow in it, and it always looks brown because you're neutralizing, because it'll have some of the same three pigments in it. If you're talking about opposites on the color wheel, it's a matter of whenever you have all three primaries, red, yellow, and blue, that mixture will give you somewhere between brown and black. So if I have red, the complementary color is green. So red and yellow will make orange, but as soon as I add in that third primary, which is blue, to the red and yellow, I'll get brown. So whenever you're mixing and you say, oh, what's the complementary color? It's the one color that's missing. It will. So if I'm mixing purple, if I'm dealing with purple and I'm going to be doing here, and I want the complementary color, and purple is made of red and blue, the missing color is yellow. So that's sort of how you can always remember what that complementary color is that you're doing. Okay, so from there, I'm going to start with my darkest darks and end up with my highlight, presumably. I'll do a block in, sort of simple, fairly thin, and then I'll add on and layer and try to develop. I'll probably develop this front pair so that this doesn't go on for so long.
And you block it with sienna?
I blocked it in with burnt sienna. I did my drawing, yeah, with burnt sienna. Okay. Now, so when I mixed my purples, I did one a little with more alizarin and one with a little more ultramarine. And this purple in shadow, I don't want to have the same, here it is with full chroma, meaning but we don't have a lot of light here, but that is really purpley. And I will definitely want to add a little yellow into that to gray it down. And I put that on so then I can show you the difference. It's got a little of the yellow cast in it from the pear. And so it's got, I'm not sure that you can see that in this darkness. Maybe I'll stop for a second and put one of the lights on above if it doesn't change it much so that you can see better. Okay. And I'm always drawing again. Now, one thing you'll see me do when I do this is not, I don't want a coloring book within the edges. I actually want to go outside my lines because otherwise you'll end up with sort of a white halo often when you're trying to paint. And as things turn, they're a little bit darker at their edges, so it's fine if it picks up a little bit of that paint below. All right, I'm going to try and do this fairly quickly. It's ultramarine, alizarin crimson, and a little yellow. And it's my absolute darkest dark on this painting. My next darkest dark is probably this crevice shadow here. And the yellow on top of this reddish purple is actually made it quite reddish underneath there, which is pretty cool. It's almost glowing. So I've just added a little straight alizarin to the mix that I had before.
So, I mean, the crimson, because you wanted to lighten that dark, or because it's on purple? In other words,
Because
you
it's a
added-
combination of purple
Okay,
and the warmth of the pear
okay,
was was making it a very warm, hot
okay.
shadow under there. So moving up, I'm going to put in this piece in the back and then this lighter purple. Now the light bulb that I'm using is an old-fashioned incandescent that's got a lot of yellow-orange. It's pretty low on the Kelvin scale. So I am going to literally put some orange into my gray. I'm using the gray left over from yesterday's. And I'm putting in actually quite a bit. Here was the original gray without the warmth, and as soon as I put it on, I went, oh, whoops, that's a mistake. So now I've added some warmth. Can you see that difference? And I'm going to add a little more lightness, just a touch. Okay. Particularly on this side, I'm going to end up starting on this side where it's darker, and then I'll add more light here because that's where the light source is. And I'm going to block this in quickly. And I'm going to wipe out the one that was more blue. It's looking a little greenish from the orange, so I'm adding more red in it.
Sorry, question. So you lightened it up using just white or more red also?
Both.
Both orange and,
Both.
and white.
This is a good spot where if you took your isolator, and I can do it with this, and if you look at that spot, it is a very warm gray, even though it's a black piece. And because of the light change, I'm always conscious of the fact that what's here, and many times I will, when I'm mixing my paint up, and you can't, I think you can see it here, it'll be like a train, change, 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 from the same sort of mother pile. And then if I need to go back sort of in the middle and make a switch, I can. Now, I'm putting this on like really quite lightly, and I'm not, it's, when I'm blocking something in, you'll see me sort of getting it all in. What I'm not doing is going like this. That sort of, by the time you touch that 2 or 3 times, you're taking paint off. So you want to try to avoid that. Okay. I'm going to try a piece of this. This is like gorgeous. Great color. You never get to use a color like this. Wow. That's just alizarin with a little blue. It's sort of at one spot I can keep this in, and this is sort of the original paper color. When the light is on it, it's going to change it, and by the time I get here where the light is stronger, there's actually quite a bit of yellow in down here. This is a little more in shadow, so I'm going to be able to dull this. So I'm not going to darken this, but if I add yellow into this, it's going to automatically dull it, and it's going to give you a better color. You don't want to add black into it. So I'll take that and And I think I'll need to add a little bit of blue. Okay, now I want to get to the shadows. So I've got that color with some blue and this is, I have to add yellow in here. In fact, that center color is almost brown looking as a result. It's an absolute brown that I just put up there, but it's going to work because of the yellow surrounding it. There's a tremendous amount of colors bouncing off onto each other. There's reflected colors when in a still life, which is what makes it really a lot of fun. That was too dark.
This one, are you, I can't see what you're doing, is that mostly white that you're bringing in?
This one I upped the blue a little bit because this side doesn't have the light, and the left side is bluer where the light doesn't hit it. So I want that to be pretty clear. And I have a sort of a big, quote, mother pile of what the color I'm working in, but I keep changing it. And the light changes. Each inch of this is a little different, and you want that because otherwise it's going to look like you've painted a wall and it's boring. You want change, change, change. And so being conscious of the light source allows you to make those changes. And yes, I'm merging those ever so slightly. This is like hot orange in that little tiny space. as this shadow goes off, it becomes lighter, it becomes fuzzier, and in this case, it becomes a lot bluer. And I think it has to do with the reflection of the blue-gray shadow that's in the room. Where the light source is down here on the table, you can see how blue it is on the left on the white tablecloth compared to the shadow. I mean, it literally is like this blue-gray getting kicked into it. Not bright enough. So I'm adding more white and a little more of the red to keep this pretty vibrant. And I think that's because the warm light allows this to be pretty fluorescent looking almost. Now I'll need to go back and get that in-between color so that that merges a little better. Now, I'm putting this down and I'm leaving my strokes obvious. The pieces are there. If you used a round brush, your strokes would look different. I'm using flats, and it's kind of obvious. The tool that I'm using is here. If you want a seamless, totally no stroke type of painting, you'd probably want to switch to something like a soft sable, which will give you a softer edge and merge better. It all depends on what you want. Just a personal preference, I like the fact that you can see the hand in the painting. Now, it's fairly rough at this point, but I want to not belabor this too much. So let me make sure I have no remnants of some of this darker color, because this, the light of this yellow is kicking right into here, and a lot here as well. It's a little bit bluer here, but boy, this is really amazingly yellow-orange looking. And I will go back and add more yellow on that as well. I'm able to lay this on top because it's like a feather.
Did you thin it?
No, if I thinned it, you'd get in trouble because then it would be watery and it would be a mess. I think you've probably, beyond this initial dark, I don't think you've seen me use much of anything, just the paint. Right before, I'm going to put a little bit of this in here, and obviously I missed a spot. Wait, that's this color. Because these are shadows, I'm really softening those edges. Okay, let's get a little bit of the dark, and then I'm going to jump into the pears. Say that again?
Is that the same color you were using on the lower part?
Yes. Pretty much. As this does not get, this is not getting as much light as this side. And I'm sort of blocking this in crudely. I mean, I'm stepping back and I'm saying, as bright and light as I could get that without it starting to turn gray, because I do have all three pigments in that. I could actually probably get light, but sometimes the danger is that once you start adding white, you always lose chroma. And I want an intense chroma up front there, so it's a little tricky. But let's see what happens when I do the yellow. So let me just clean up enough to get into that. So I'm grabbing, obviously, the yellow. And I've got both the light and the medium. I could do it completely with one. I really could. But these happen to be pretty warm, so I think the medium is probably going to be better. Now I've put some blue in it for the shadow, but naturally that gives me super green. So no matter what, I've got to add a little red. In fact, I'm putting in my straight purple. The blue purple is probably the best way to go. Now, as these pairs turn, their edges get darker, especially on the shadow side. This is picking up some of this color and then some shadow color. So my darkest shadows will be on those sides. And there's a spot here where I have a clear, dark core of a shadow on this pair, and this where it's getting kicked off of this other pair, rather than a reflective shadow, is pretty dark. Get that a smidge lighter. sort of like army green that I've ended up with. Now, once again, I'm getting lots of reflective color up here. And this guy starts looking orange, bouncing back and forth. So while I'm doing this, I'm paying attention to the gray of my palette, and I want the shadows side to be at the right value. Let me see if I can get this. And it is, the shadow side on these pairs are pretty dead mid-tone. So this is a good guide to making sure that I've got the right value.
So that means you're changing color, but not value?
Yes. Well, the value changes a little bit. Like this spot here has got reflected light. I'm going to get that a little lighter and a little yellower. But you can change temperature and color and keep the same value so that something reads all the same, but will have great interest. It's a good thing to keep in mind to always be doing. There's blue in there.
Yeah, and it's kind of the transition color, or what's that?
Yeah, that the edge, it gets bluer just as it starts to turn because it's picking up so much of the shadow color rather than the reflected color. So good question. So this part where it's almost directly up, and I'll merge that a little bit later, but I wanted to sort of emphasize it right now. And there are a couple spots where there's really some definite pieces of shadow. Sometimes I think of painting as sort of weaving, and so you're taking pieces from different things around it and they all go on to each other. I just mixed quite an orange. This is jumping up into the pear, and so I'm really seeing a pretty hot edge here as it turns, especially in here where it's really bouncing up. Having it darken a little bit also allows it to turn so it doesn't look like a paper cutout. You know, like you've glued it on, so to speak. All right, this is the first time I'm adding any white. And I still need to go back to that more orange edge. There's a little bit of blue on my brush that picked up and changed that, but I think I want to leave it because it does, as it turned, become a little less saturated, whereas this has got to be super clean. And I'll grab a new brush for that. I'm going to add a hair of red to the yellow. You see how kind of cold that looks? And I want to warm it up a little bit more. Now, I'm still not using any white because I want this to have a good deal of color. And I also want to be able to see the highlight. I'm going to put a highlight in right now so that I know that my color and value next to the highlight have enough value that you can then see the highlight. This is pure white with just a little bit of yellow in it. I find I can use the most color saturation just as something is turning. And then this will then become lighter. Now, I can later go back and soften the transition between the shadow and the light side, but I can transition much better if I've got some intensity of color right there. As soon as I pick up another color that I may or may not want, I wipe my brush off quick. And as I creep toward that highlight, I'm going to keep adding a little more white. And that's about as much as I can put on and then still see the highlight. These have gotten a little too dark. I'm going to switch that by taking that off and mixing it into the yellow that I've got. So often if I'm doing a highlight, let me get to my clean brush for that, I will apply it. And then just soften the edges because it becomes like a halo. It's the color of the light mixed with the object. And then there's a reflected light in the middle, which is what is a little more intense. So if it's not intense enough, I can always add a little more white. Sometimes I have to re-add the highlight the next day because it tends to sink in. But I think we're okay. And if I don't step back, I'll never know what I've got. Just going to warm that up a little. What I'm trying to do, though, is keep the planes clear, the changes of light. What I don't like is this.
You didn't like the shape of that?
Yeah, I had to fix that. Add a little of that sitting by. Now this is what's referred to as alla prima, meaning just one shot, just thick paint immediately all at once. If I were doing this over multiple sessions, I might have done it a little thinner and gotten pretty close to what I want, and then gone back and repainted the whole thing again, getting another layer and getting richer, especially in the lights. And I want that to lighten up a little. For the sake of time, I'm going to block these in like super fast, and then depending on how much time we have left, I'll go back in and start making adjustments. And I'm doing this pretty thin, just so I've got a value, because I'm looking at things against white on the canvas, and that is hard, makes it hard to look at anything. So I'm just putting these in pretty blocked in.
If you you had more time, would you have toned the canvas?
No, not necessarily. Sometimes yes, sometimes not.
How would you tone the canvas?
But in this case, if I had a darker painting in general, I'd probably tone it. I wanted to have this yellow vibrant, and having the white underneath is probably a help for that type of thing. I know people who tone their canvases yellow and red and all kinds of stuff. It just depends on, and some people leave those little bits of color obvious just to add energy, and it's a more contemporary look.
But you generally don't, you usually just go over a white cap and cover everything.
It depends on what I'm doing, but if it's got a lot of color in it, I'm probably going to have more tone just because I have done my value painting, and that has meant that the canvas is completely toned at the end, with the exception of maybe one or two little tiny spots. This pear is so much warmer in its shadow. And when I'm done here, I really am going to have you guys all get your viewers and come look at the colors that are here, because it does go pretty crazy. I'll lighten that up a little.
Are you using any of your burnt sienna?
No, not since the initial piece. And you'll see me keep wiping my brush because I'm picking up some of the shadow which has blue in it, and that will give me some ugly bruised looking pear on the light side when you get all that blue-brown color in it. Yep. This is should be a clean, clear yellow right there, and I picked up a little bit of purple. I was strongly tempted to just sort of mush that in between, and I decided to mix the proper color and lay it on top instead. And when I have a timer set so I don't go too long for you guys, because I think you've got to have gotten the idea pretty much. So when that goes off, I'm going to stop wherever that is. And I want to bring...
Will that pair get a highlight?
Yes, unless the timer goes off. That was going to bring in too much blue. But not as much of a highlight as this main one, even though it literally does have it. I don't want it to be as prominent for sure.
But you'll still use white?
I will use white, and it's going to pick up the yellow underneath. I could mix yellow in it, but I know it's going to pick it up, and so I'm going to probably, in this case, use white. Actually, I have the mixture from before. It is with a little bit of yellow in it, so I'm just going to do that and lay it on and not mix it at all. if I want my highlight to stand out, that's it, I'm just going to use value. So whiter yellow against darker yellow will do that because the light hits it and it's like a halo. It's super light, a little lighter, and then a little more color. The saturation of the color gets whited out literally by the light. So if you think of it in that way, you want to keep your saturation around it with color. If I were to add a little purple into that, it would look like I have a bruise next to the highlight, probably. And I can soften these more, but I'm going to see how if I can complete a little more of this, especially this, which is pretty disconcerting. This is a little dramatic and needs to be merged. Actually, while I have that one, tends to be, that pair is a little more greener. So this plane that is away from the light, I'll put in the slightly greener and then it will look I'm bluing this shadow a bit. So it was feeling too harsh.
You said bluing?
Bluing it, sort of bluing. It's like I'm taking, when I'm painting, I'm thinking of two things. One is that this gray blue of the room is kind of dumping into the shadows. They're like these reflective pools, whereas the stuff in the light is being affected. Everything that's in the light is being affected by that light bulb. And everything that's in the shadow is being affected by the surrounding area. So it's almost like I can dump a little yellow-orange into everything I've got in the light. And I can dump some of this gray-blue into everything that's in the shadow, because those two things are affected, and that's a great unifying thing. And the light does affect it that way.
Is the painting likely to look different when you put it in natural light then?
The painting?
Yeah.
No, but the still life would look extremely different if I were to change the bulb or put it in front of the window with north light. The colors would get cooler instead of warmer in the lights.
It's been over 40 minutes.
So the color of that white is warmer here, and it starts getting more blue-purple by the time I get to the right-hand side. It's really, these colors are like jumping off onto it. But at no time is that, I don't know if you can see this, if I do this. I'm holding white next to this, and it's, I don't have enough light. This is so much cooler than when the light hits it. Oops. Okay.
Are you using like pieces, little bits of color from the things you already mixed up in this white?
You absolutely guessed it. I'm using little bits that are laying right here, but I think it's gotten a little bit dark, so I'm going to on this side especially. Picked up a little too much purple there and darkened it right away. So even this little tiny strip on the bottom, I basically changes. Now, when I repaint this line, the last thing you paint always tends to feel like it's on top. So I'm sort of utilizing it. That's also why I don't mind even when I was doing the pears and some of the purple was running into it, I didn't mind that that allows me, when I put the layer of the yellow pear on top, the pear kind of feels like it's more in front of something. Okay. And if I have, lucky, some of this, well, I'm not going to make this like super hard perfect because I don't want to draw too much attention to that. I wanted it more in here. Okay, so I could continue with this for another hour or two, tweaking it and getting it better and better. I purposely left it probably a little more, actually not that much more pumped up with color than it is in reality. But so many people are so timid on using colors, especially with yellow. They tend to use them so whitish that I wanted to really push you in. The only time I touched white was down here and a little bit here. So, you know, the yellow is light by itself naturally, so that's part of that. And keep glancing at your palette to say, okay, this is darker than that palette. These are the same value as the palette. These are all lighter than the palette. That kind of helps keep you out of trouble a little bit. And you got to keep a clean brushes and clean palette. I mean, because otherwise you do get mud if things start mixing. And above all, just lay it and leave it as much as you can. But still, I primarily just use the alizarin and just the cad yellow, like 99%. So in this painting, there's basically just 3 pigments over and over and over again.
Yeah, permanent rose is a lot lighter, and it probably would work pretty well too.
Yeah, yeah. But then if that's your red, use that as your red. Because otherwise it looks like you've got a candy store shop window with all kinds of pigments all thrown together, unless that is your point of the painting. Depends on your intention. And my intention for this was just to really highlight this yellow. There was a lot of purple constantly going in the yellow, and then, as you know, there was a lot of yellow going into the purple, and even for the shadows. So, okay.
I'm so surprised how much blue there was on the shadow side of the pears.
Okay, go get your viewers with the isolator, and I want you to take a look at the colors. And then later you're going to do the same thing, obviously, to your own still life.